Hey everyone, welcome to Penny's Mind Files Method, the podcast showing you where the off ramp to the healing highway is when you're stuck on the life sucks road that goes nowhere. In this episode, we're talking about bullying, why it hits so deeply, the possible mind files that are being referenced and reinforced, the emotional cost, and the importance of identifying, reassessing, and ultimately resolving the mind files that are involved so that no one can ever gain power over you again. I talk about the impact of bullying in my memoir, Aces High, and what I learned when I worked through my own mind files that were related to that. And here's what I wrote: the bully's power lies in your belief in the lie that they're hurling at you. The most important lesson to learn is that bullies have no power unless you give it to them. So the question is, how do you give it? How do you give your power away to the bully? As soon as somebody starts talking trash to you, hurling accusations or hurtful words in your direction, your mind's process has already gone into your fear cabinet, retrieved all the mind files that hold narratives that are related to what's happening to you, and they're already referencing them. So, for example, let's say that this person is your supervisor at work. Bullies often hold positions of power in the workplace, managerial power. But it's important to understand the difference between managerial power and personal power. In other words, as a supervisor, they have the power to assign tasks to you and then assess your productivity in doing that task. They might even have the power to choose how often you work if they do the schedule. And maybe they have the power to punish you if you really step out of line. Workplace punishment could be just a warning that goes in your HR file, or maybe it's something like reduction of hours, something along those lines. Your supervisor has a supervisor, right? Everybody answers to somebody unless they're the owner, because most companies, there's multiple layers of management. So your supervisor holds managerial power over you, not personal power. But the words that they use, whatever their name they're calling you or whatever accusation they're hurling at you, is triggering personal insecurities. And those personal insecurities were formed way back in childhood. So what happens is you react as you did when you were a kid who had no idea about power structures. Usually the reaction is defensive. And when you defend yourself, ultimately you are admitting that you are beneath, in quotes, the person who is trying to overpower you. If you defend yourself, you're saying, yeah, you have power over me. That's how you give your power away to them. You act in a defensive manner. Now, why do you do that? Well, because that defensive position was established in your childhood when you were being bullied. So when your mind's process references that file, it reminds you, this is what you do, this is how you deal with it. And then so you do that, and then your actions now, the situation, it reinforces that original belief. You've just reinforced adding more emotional filters, giving more energetic frequency to that mind file. So let's look at a common childhood fear when it comes to self-worth, and that's not fitting in. The mind file will have a title, something like Who I Am, or I'm Not Good Enough, or Why Can't I Fit In, something along that lines. And in the mind file are going to be all the narratives, which are just stories that you came up with as a child when you were trying to figure out who you were in relation to your peers, in relation to everybody around you. So the key words here are in relation to your peers. People talk about peer pressure all the time, but what does it mean and how does it apply to you? People categorize. Even as kids, we categorize because that's how we try to make sense of who we are. We compare ourselves to everybody. We compare and then we categorize. So in my case, I was born with a skeletal deformity. I was physically challenged. I couldn't run or play like the other kids, and I walked with this crazy, horrible limp. So when other kids saw me, they could plainly see that I walked differently. And if I tried to run, I just fell. So back in my day, we had gym class all throughout grade school. The kids realized that if I got put on their team, they had a higher chance of losing the game because I certainly wasn't going to win them any points. So it makes sense then, doesn't it, that nobody wanted me on their team. Why would they? Many of the kids that I went to school with called me unpleasant names. It's how kids try to elevate themselves over others. Adults do it too. They just do it in different, more subtle ways. Now, as an adult, I can rationalize that and understand that from an informed perspective, right? I can understand the psychology of their choices while recognizing that they were little kids and so was I. And that helps me understand why they didn't want me on their team. The information helps me reassess that mind file that said I'm not good enough. And inside were narratives that I'm less than they are because I can't run and play like them. I mean, there was tons of other narratives in there too, but let's just go with that one for now. So the mind file deals with self-worth, and it's full of comparisons that you made as a child before you were anywhere near capable of understanding anything. So let's flash forward now to I'm an adult at work and my supervisor says something to me, something like, whatever, you're a ditz. Why are you always messing up? So what triggered my mind's process to pull the I'm not good enough file? Well, several things. One, the assumed superiority of my supervisor reflected in their body language, and the statement that I'm a ditz, right? They're calling me a name. So those two things, all by themselves, sent a message to my mind's process that says, I'm better than you. So the mind file housed in my fear cabinet holds millions of narratives by the time that I'm an adult, all of which talk about how everybody's better than me. Now, all of those get reinforced because the original belief was created when I was like in grade 2, whatever grade it was, because it's never been challenged. So all those old narratives are constantly being reinforced because I haven't ever challenged them. So what's my response? I become defensive. Defending one's position isn't an act of love, it's an act of fear. Because what's really happening when you're defending yourself against a statement or an accusation is you're saying, yep, you're right. You're better than me, and that really pisses me off. But here's the thing, bullies are inherently insecure. That's why they are on the attack. The best defense is a good offense, right? So they'll project their insecurities, their guilt, their shame, their apathy, whatever, onto you. And you respond by defending yourself. You've just told them they're right. And so now they're empowered in their belief that they are better than you, that they're somehow better than whoever they bully and get away with, right? They challenged you and you confirmed what they hoped to be true. But this all happened as a kid. Now let's take this a step further. So let's look at the difference between adult bullies and school-aged bullies. So when kids bully, they do it in a way that's highly visible. There's no game to it because kids aren't psychologically sophisticated yet. They're not capable of being strategic with their intent. They just do stuff and say stuff that embarrasses you or humiliates you in front of your classmates. Adults, on the other hand, are fully capable of understanding how to hide their intent. They'll craft derogatory statements and accusations in a way that is ambiguous. So if you call them out, then they can gaslight you. They turn it around and gaslight you. Kids don't understand power structures. All they know is verbal dominance, maybe physical dominance, depending on their home life. But adults understand hierarchies. They know how to use emotional leverage and how to manipulate perception. They'll use tone, silence, exclusion, and even concern as weapons. The way adults bully is intentionally strategic, psychological, and engineered. Also, adults will attempt to threaten your social standing and reputation. And in the case where it's a workplace bully, maybe they threaten to dock your pay or suggest that they can have your wages cut or fired altogether. Adult bullies rely on ignorance, meaning they hope that you have no idea what your actual legal rights are, which sadly is the case more often than not, because when you aren't aware of your rights, you will blindly believe that they have the power to do whatever it is that they're saying that they're going to do. Job security is one of the most common weapons. Way back when the victim mentality really started to gain ground, especially in the mental health field and self-help field, there was this idea that adult bullies were acting on autopilot. And whatever they did wasn't really their fault. The fact that they manipulated people was just a coping mechanism developed in their childhood as a result of a high level of family dysfunction. So we should all just extend grace. Well, there's some truth in that idea, but that assumes that people aren't in control of their thoughts and feelings. And that's simply not true. Adults can, at any given moment, choose differently. Most importantly, right, as an adult, everybody they can choose to become accountable for their thoughts and then their subsequent actions. If all we do is make excuses for unacceptable behavior, nothing will ever change in our personal lives, and our personal lives extend into our communities because that's where we live, right? What happens in the micro is absolutely happening in the macro. If we accept it in our small, tight knit family, we're going to accept it in the wider scale of things. Okay, so let's have a look at where all this falls in the emotional filter frequency scale, because that's about the best visual for the hows and whys of the power of our unresolved mind files. Now, I know if you're listening on Podbean or Spotify or Apple, you can't see what we're seeing here. So if your curiosity is sparked, I encourage you to go over to YouTube at a later time and watch this episode. So at the bottom of the scale, we have shame and guilt. They're so close. They're nearly the same frequency, according to Dr. Hawkins. Guilt vibrates slightly higher than shame, but hard, like not that much. So when somebody calls you a derogatory name, the emotions that are generated right away are guilt and shame. I mean, of course, fear is also part of the overall frequency. The fear that nobody's ever going to like you, right? When you're a kid, that's what you're thinking. And as an adult, that fear doesn't actually change. The need to belong and be accepted is a universal desire, right? Everybody wants to be liked and needed and loved. Now, remember the emotions at the bottom end of the scale are layered, right? That's why when we have wounds and we're carrying them around, they say it's a heavy burden, right? It's a heavy burden to carry all that with you. If you were bullied a lot as a kid, made fun of, or even just teased, and ultimately it doesn't even matter by whom, like think of how many narratives you have stored in the mind file that deals with self-worth. Now add up all of that emotional energy, because remember, it compounds. So let's use 5,000 as the number. If there's both shame and guilt assigned to a mind file, and the file's referenced 5,000 times by the time you're 18, which is a really low number, by the way. I mean, if a child is bullied once a day, only once a day, over a 5-day school week for 40 weeks a year, over 11 years of school, that's like 2,200 incidents, right? That's the minimum. But in reality, bullying happens multiple times a day. Could be a comment in the class, something somebody says in the hallway. Then you're at lunch and somebody says something. Now you're on the playground, somebody says or does something. I mean, it's probably 2, 3, 5, 10 times a day, right? Where people are hurling insults and pejoratives your way. So now we're talking 6, 8, 10,000. Who knows? Imagine being told the same lie about yourself thousands of times before you're even 16. All of those files hold the energetic frequency of shame and guilt and fear, right? All layered, all heavy, all vibrating at the lowest possible frequency. So when a bully, child or adult, says something that hits that old wound, your mind doesn't go searching for a new file. It goes straight to the old one that has the most emotional weight. The mind file that is the most intense because it's been reinforced the most times. The one that has been reinforced the most times has the strongest kind of gravitational pull. That's why you collapse so quickly when it happens. It's why you defend yourself without even thinking. It's why your nervous system reacts the way it does before logic can even come into the equation. You're not reacting in the present moment. You're reacting to an energetic frequency that you've been carrying around that has been gaining power for years and years and years. So here's the key, folks. You cannot resolve a mind file while you're vibrating at the same frequency that created it, right? Like you can't rewrite shame from shame. You can't rewrite guilt from guilt or fear from fear. You have to be moving up the scale. So you move from shame to guilt, then guilt to apathy, apathy to grief, grief to anger, and all the way up till you get to courage and hopefully neutral. Past that to willingness and then acceptance. Because every step up the scale not only gives you more clarity, more emotional oxygen, it also gives you more access to your adult self. Now, once you're in your adult self, that's when you can finally open the mind file and reassess it from an informed adult perspective. That's when you can say, well, this file was written by a child who didn't understand anything. I'm not that child anymore. And this narrative is just not true. Now, you have to back it up for why it's not true, right? Otherwise, it's incongruent. Now, nobody has power over you unless you give it to them. When you realize that, well, that's the moment that any bully is going to lose access to your internal world. Not because they changed, because you changed. You have the ability right now as an adult to open those files, look at the narratives, and say, this was never about me. This was about children trying to figure out where they belong in the herd. Now, as an adult, you now understand that bullies don't operate from love. They operate from shame and guilt and fear and insecurity. They project downward because they don't know how to regulate upward. And when you understand that, something shifts because you stop absorbing their words. You stop defending yourself. You stop collapsing into the child who didn't know any better. You stop believing the lie. And the moment you stop believing the lie, well, their power's gone, right? People don't have power over you. You reclaim the part of you that they were trying to reach, that wounded part. So this is the heart of the mind files method, right? Identify the mind file that was referenced, trace it back to where it came from, and you do that through journaling is the best way to do it. Then start moving up the emotional frequency scale. You have to work through all those emotions. You can't just jump, right? You have to actually go one at a time. Reassess the narrative from your informed adult self, and then resolve the file, rewrite it so it reflects truth and not trauma, right? Because you have to back it up with, well, these are the things that I've done in my life that say that that is not true. So when you do that, you're not just healing from bullying, you're changing the entire architecture of how you respond to people who try to diminish you in any way. You're no longer living from the emotional frequency of the child who is hurt. You're living from the clarity of the adult who finally understands what happened. And that is where your power is. That's it for today, folks. I hope you heard something that spoke to you. If it stirred something in you this episode, if you recognized a mind file that you have or a narrative, I want you to know that you can reclaim the parts of you that were shaped by somebody else. You can. And when you do, no bully, past or present, will ever have power over you again. So let me know what you think. Leave a comment, and please hit that thumbs up so other people can find this podcast. We'll see you next time.